This video is being made to address certain common problems students have with regard to melody-harmony relationships, voicing, and range of voicings in relation to both melody and bass. Okay, the first common problem is putting the root as a melody note on a major 7 chord. Listen to what this sounds like. You'll notice there's a second between this piano sound and this piano sound. This is an electric piano sound, this is a acoustic piano sound. And that's creating a pretty edgy effect, okay, because you're getting a minor second at the top of the voicing. Now, there are times in a musical situation where you would want that, or you're okay with that, but you should be aware that most of the time it's a little bit too harsh for if you're trying to create a resolve, particularly if you're trying to create a resolution sound that's more open and transparent. So if you really want to have the melody be the root, it's often advisable to at least consider changing the major 7 in that chord to a 6, creating a 6-9 chord sound, and then you get this. And then the melody has a much more consonant sound to it. Okay, the other solution for this situation is to change the melody. And I'm always encouraging people to use more tensions in their melodies, so why not use a 9? Or go up to a 3rd. Or go down to a major 7. Okay, so that's the other solution to that. Okay, point number 2. Timbre matters. This melody is being helped to stand out because it has a different timbre from this accompanying. This is an electric piano, this is an acoustic piano. If your melody and chords are the same timbre, the same instrument, they especially need their own range to stand out. So what does that mean? Well, usually it means that the top note of the voicing is a 1/3 or so away from the melody. Right here, that's just barely the case. It's barely the case. But if you feel like your voicings are, if your melody isn't really coming out and isn't really speaking, it's getting lost in the accompaniment, you need to lower your voicings. So and that doesn't mean lower the entire voicing, it just means maybe take the top voice down an octave and you keep all your voice leading, and then now the melody will jump out even more. Now it sounds bigger, everything sounds bigger because we have more space for the melody to occupy. Now there are special cases where you want the melody to be lower inside the voicing, but again, that's where you would want to have timbre. Timbre difference will help that work. Okay, if these were the same timbre, that wouldn't work so well. The ideal place for 4-way close voicings, which is what these are, is between the G, approximately the second line G, down as far as D5. D5 on treble clef is way down here, the 4th ledger line. On bass clef, it's the middle line. Okay, we don't want any note of our voicing to be any lower than that. Okay, because if you do, you're going to get muddy, horrible sounding voicings. All I have to do is put all these voicings down an octave and you'll see what I mean. Now I'm going to mute the bass for a minute so that we don't hear the bass guitar. And now you're just going to hear just the voicings. And here they are without in the normal range, a decent range for 4-way close. But look what happens if I put them down an octave. They're just a muddy mess down there. You can't really hear what's going on. And they sound horrible on acoustic piano too. Here's what they would sound like on acoustic piano, if I can get that happening. sounds awful. Don't ever write intervals that low. So there's two ways to measure this. One is don't have any note of your voicing be lower than D3. So the lowest note of your voicing cannot be lower than D3. Okay, that note. Another way is this this is a general low interval limit rule. No thirds or seconds below D3, right? So no second, but seconds really should be a little higher than thirds. So I wouldn't write any seconds below F. So that's going to help you avoid that horrible sound, okay? Now, if you want to create a feeling of bass, but you're creating your four-way close and you don't want the lowest note of your voicing is not what you want the bass to be, then you need to add a separate bass stave. And that stave, bass notes, can be distant from the voicing. They can be some distance away. Now, if this was piano, if I add a note here and I add this D here, it would be somewhere along, it would be right there. And that would sound okay. And even this single bass note way down here would sound okay. Okay, but that's not a very practical way to write piano voicing. So either add a separate, have a grand staff and have this be the treble clef and this be the bass left hand of the piano, where you can have lower bass notes. Again, because they're not voicings, they can go much lower. It's just, the only problem is when you have voicings or intervals, you can't go below D3, right? So the other way, if you want a really big sound, is to use bass guitar or acoustic bass, because it's an octave, it sounds an octave lower than concert pitch. So when we have this bass, it's actually playing what would be on piano would be this D down here. So we're getting a really big sound that way. And then we can actually represent this sound as D minor 7, G7, C7. If we want an inversion, we just simply move our bass note. Say, if we wanted D minor over F, we could move to there. If we wanted G over F, do that, or G over D or whatever, and we could get our inversion sound. I've got to unmute the bass here. Okay, but just having only the voicings and then having the low note, like calling this D minor 7 over C and G7 over B, yes, without the bass here, that is technically what you're getting, but because it's not in a really low bass range, you're not getting the full effect of the inversion. So the best way to get an inversion sound is to have either a grand staff with an independent bass creating the bass motion you want, or to have a bass part with the independent bass, okay? So to recap, be careful about using the root in the melody on a major 7 chord. Timbre matters. If you want your melody to stand out, you probably want your melody to be a different timbre from the accompaniment part. There are exceptions to that, but that's a general rule. Generally, if you want your melody to stand out, you should create some space between it and the top note of the accompanying voicings. If you want a low bass independent sound with more space in the bass, you should create a separate stave, or like a grand staff with a separate bass stave, or use bass guitar or acoustic bass to create that separate bass sound that's filling out your accompaniment. And last but certainly not least, probably most important of all, is be aware of low interval limits. Never write a voicing with intervals in it, close intervals in it, lower than this D, and be careful about seconds. I wouldn't do seconds any lower than that F. If you do, you'll get a very muddy sound, and you have to be very careful about that, and you'll just undermine your music. Remember that bass sounds an octave lower than written, so you're getting a really big interval sound here. What you don't want is the sound of things sounding like this all over the place. Oops. That's a horrible sound. Do not write that.